All right, we're going to do a test record here just so I can see if the audio is working, because the last time I recorded this, I went all about 30 minutes and everything was, it was all gone. Mierda. Gone. Oop. All right, welcome back to the channel. Thank you for joining me. So I wanted to take a deep dive back into the Nosleep subreddit. I find the Nosleep subreddit pretty fun to go through because there's some stories in there that kind of mimic what could be real life stories or embellishments, fan fiction stories. So I wanted to dive back in and go through a couple that I found and that I thought were pretty creepy. I found these recently. I will link the users down in the description below if you want to go check them out. But nonetheless, I found a couple here that I think will fit the bill, and we'll go ahead and we'll dive in right now. I hired a private investigator on myself to see what he could find. I regret it immensely. It's not every day that someone hires a private investigator, especially not my friend. She had her reasons though. She suspected her husband of infidelity. When she shared what the PI had found with me, it piqued my interest. I'd always dreamed of becoming a PI, so I sheepishly asked her for the investigator's card. At the time, I had a lot of extra cash and my life had been feeling dull. I spent most of my days playing games and watching YouTube, and I wanted to shake things up. So I decided to hire the same private investigator as my friend. I told my boyfriend about my plan, and he was into it too. We came up with a plan for him to act like I was missing and submitted details about my family, occupation, and so on. I warned my boyfriend that we wouldn't be able to meet up while the investigation was happening, but he was fine with it. However, things quickly took a strange turn. When the PI got involved, he seemed to doubt my existence. My boyfriend had to convince him that I was real, and then the investigator kept accusing my boyfriend of wasting his time. Finally, on the 5th day of the investigation, my boyfriend called me in a panic. He claimed that the only person who had ever lived in the state with my name, which is very unique, had died a year before I was born. Even more eerily, this girl had lived in my childhood home. I thought my boyfriend was playing a prank, but his tone was bone-chilling. "I'm not playing a prank," he said. "The PI even took me to the gravesite. It had your exact name, down to your middle name." I was shocked and didn't know what to do. I called my mother to ask her what was going on. Her demeanor changed to one of seriousness, and she told me to stay where I was. Meanwhile, I contacted the private investigator and begged him for answers. He only asked me more irrelevant questions like where was I born and my parents' names. When I mentioned that my mother was on her way to my apartment, the PI asked for her full name. When I provided it, he told me to leave my apartment immediately and come to his office before my mother arrived. As I rushed to grab my keys, my mother pulled into the driveway with a man I didn't recognize. He was wearing a winter jacket despite it being spring, and I felt like something was off. Before I could leave, the man pulled out a gun. I recognized it as my boyfriend's Glock and ran to my neighbor's yard, expecting to be shot. Thankfully, nothing happened, and I eventually ran into my boyfriend's car. However, there was another man in the passenger seat. It was the private investigator. He explained to me that he had a theory that my parents were involved in a kidnapping that took place a few states over. They did this because the police had suspected them of neglecting their infant daughter, and when she ended up perishing, they had to completely replace the child as to not get caught. My parents never had mistreated me in my life, so this all came to me as a shock. Of course, I denied it at first. However, there was no reason for my mother to bring an armed stranger into my living space. We got the authorities involved and they excavated the backyard of my childhood home. They found the body of the child they had neglected, the child they had me replace. Several years have passed since then. I've done my best to avoid thinking about this situation. I've completely moved out of country, leaving everyone behind, my friends, my boyfriend, and the private investigator. I have no idea how deep this rabbit hole goes. I don't know how many connections my parents have had. I don't even know my father's role in all of this. It just feels so overwhelming, I had to get out of there. So this to me feels kind of like true. Obviously, really no way to cross-check this kind of material to some degree, depending on how deep you go, but this definitely feels real. This is scary. This must be a horrifying feeling to basically grow up with your parents and then come to find out later, just off a whim of you saying, I'm going to have a little fun in life and hire a private investigator to investigate me and see what they come up with me. Make it a little game with your boyfriend and go from there. And then all of a sudden uncover and unearth this strange, dark mystery past. It almost feels like something that could be written into a movie. So therefore, I don't know whether to think this is real or if it's a really well-crafted fan fiction, but If this did really happen, I feel bad for this person because that is just absolutely horrifying. That's life-altering stuff right there. So I definitely found this to be a very creepy story. Definitely gave me a reaction, and it was very dark. So this next story that I found is called "There's Something Wrong with Our Ring Doorbell." There is motion at your front door. I've been seeing a lot more of these alerts on my phone over the last 2 days from our Ring doorbell. You can adjust how sensitive the camera is to movement so that you don't get as many false positives, and this was the first step I took. My wife and I have some bushes right by our front porch that sometimes trigger these alerts. I'd given up on checking the actual video feed for the most part because of how often this was happening. Initially, adjusting the sensitivity settings for the doorbell seemed to solve the issue. I was relieved because all of the false positives were draining the battery from the camera, and it was annoying having to bring them inside so frequently to recharge it. Recently though, I started getting more alerts during the day at odd times. They stop around bedtime, but pick up again in the early hours of the morning for some baffling reasons. The last 2 mornings, roughly around 3 a.m., I received a flurry of alerts on my phone. When I checked the Ring app, the thumbnail image for the video feed was completely dark and I couldn't make anything out. I checked the live feed and it was the same. This is odd because I always leave the porch light on at night, so I should have been able to see something. I grabbed my nightstand gun and went to investigate, opening the door slightly. I peeked outside and realized I had indeed forgotten to leave the porch light on. I like having our porch well lit at night as I feel that doing so is a deterrent to would-be thieves. I flicked it on and looked around, but I didn't see anyone around, so I closed the door, locked it, and went back to bed. This same thing happened again this morning, a flurry of motion alerts around 3 a.m. Even in my groggy state, I am self-aware enough to acknowledge how incredibly forgetful I am. I'm the guy who spends 10 minutes looking for the TV remote to only realize that it's been in his hand the whole time. I rolled my eyes at myself, figuring I forgot to turn on the porch light again. To be safe though, I clicked one of the alerts on my phone and was immediately startled by the thumbnail image the app presented to me. Staring back at me was a dark, blurry close-up of a man's face. It filled the entire thumbnail, so his face must have been almost right up against the camera. As I processed what I was seeing, I noticed a couple of other details about the man's face. Even with poor lighting, I could see enough of his face to tell that his eyes were very far apart, so much so that it bordered on unnatural. He also had the widest grin I'd ever seen a person have, with way more teeth than I would have thought humanly possible. I was so unnerved by this that even with my nightstand gun, I did not want to confront this guy. I clicked on the thumbnail in order to bring up the live feed, but the man appeared to be gone. I still couldn't make out much more of the image though, so I hesitated for a moment, trying to decide whether to phone the police to be on the safe side or check things out myself. I like to err on the safe side, so I started to get up in order to step into the other room to phone the police so as to not wake my wife. She is a light sleeper, so the slight commotion woke her anyway, and she groggily asked me what I was doing. Not wanting to worry her, I simply said that I couldn't sleep, had remembered that I left the porch light off, and that I just wanted to go turn it on. There was a pause, and what she said next made the color drain from my face. As she turned over to go back to sleep, she mumbled, "While you're at it, can you make sure to put the doorbell back up outside?" I brought it in the other day to let it charge and forgot to put it back up. I felt sick as her words sank in. The odd timing of the motion alerts during the day had been the camera picking up our own movements as the device sat charging on the kitchen counter. But the ones in the early hours of the morning, that face staring into the camera, those had also been recorded inside our home. Another alert startled me out of shock. There's motion at your front door. This is pretty good. I like this one, but this is definitely a creepy one. So when he says that he's just going to check the porch light to turn the porch light back on, and then his wife turns over and says, "Oh, by the way, can you throw the camera back up? I was charging and I forgot to do so." I mean, tell me that you wouldn't shit your pants, you know? Oh, what? What do you mean you left the camera inside? And then the alert goes off again and it says there's motion at the front door. I'm going into that kitchen with the nightstand gun. I'm probably unloading, but needless to say, it's just creepy stuff, you know? So I did enjoy this one. I thought this one was good. It hit pretty good. I'll give this one an 8 out of 10. I like this one. All right, and our last story of the day is going to be "Don't Look on the Roof." I need help. I've been followed by a corpse. She's just a little girl. The first time I saw her, she sat at the foot of my bed, knees pulled to her chest, and an inhuman smile plastered on her face, cutting way too far into her cheeks. She was decaying. She had brown tartar crowded up near her gums, Her eyes were open wide, like they were stuck in fear. They looked so alive. But her irises were such a light blue you could practically see right into them. The whites were yellowish and her skin looked to be in the early stages of decomposition. She had an eerily blue and yellow complexion, the same dark yellow as her eyes. I can't help but wonder if the dead are always so yellow. She sat and stared at me for a few minutes. Head slightly cocked, I stared back. I didn't move or blink or breathe. I wished for her to be gone, and after what felt like an hour, she finally disappeared. I took a sharp inhale, finally letting myself process what I had seen. The thick, rich smell of death lingered in the air, and even though she was gone, my heart still raced. She disappeared into thin air. My room isn't very big, so she couldn't have hidden. She was just gone. Later that night, I'd finally calmed down. I suddenly started feeling as if I was being watched. I looked into the top right corner of my closet. I realized why. There she was, perched on the shelf, watched me intently. She was not smiling now. Maybe it was my fear, or maybe her manipulation. But at once, the eyes of every poster on my wall began to melt, just out of their sockets, and even with their eyeballs turned liquid, it felt like their gaze was fixated on me. I didn't sleep that night or the night after. When I finally did sleep, it was for only about 3 hours. I was seeing her everywhere. When driving, especially at night, I'd often look back and see her sitting in the back seat through my rearview mirror. She liked to remind me that she was still there. My car began to consistently smell like her, and I stopped letting people in it. In fact, I isolated myself from everyone entirely. I feared that if she met them, they'd start to see her too. When I'd look out the window, I'd see her lurking in the woods, standing completely still. One night I was driving home, down the main road. Everyone seemed to already be asleep. It was quiet and calm, and the sky was so clear you could see every star. But while I was distracted, she jumped in front of my car. I swerved to avoid her and drove off the road. My car and myself were undamaged. I didn't hit anything, and she disappeared. I began to sob. It had now gotten to the point where she was putting my life at risk. People stopped texting me because I stopped answering. My world was falling apart. In the dead silence of night, I started hearing mumbling whispers from my backseat. She wasn't sitting there, but they grew louder. Finally, I made out what she was saying. Look at the roof. My head shot towards my passenger window, and there she was, on the roof of a house across the street. She stood there as if to tell me this is how I died. Then, without warning, she jumped. I watched as midair, her body reverted back to that of an alive young girl. I watched her hit the concrete beneath the house. The crunch of her bones and splatter of the impact on her skin rang through my car, even from the distance I kept. I screamed so loud it hurt my own ears. Then she looked up, her eyes wider, her smile bigger, her face mutilated. She looked amused. She stood on her clearly broken legs, and her shoulder was dislocated, but she showed no discomfort. She began to walk towards me. She was moving so quick, but she looked to be walking normal, or as normal as possible with 2 broken legs. I reached and fought for my seatbelt, my body gone into panic mode. She was fairly close when I finally got into the back seat of the floor. I didn't know where else to go. I'm just sitting here now. She's got her face pressed up against the glass. I had to have been here for hours by now, but it's still dark as when I got here. I tried calling everyone. I have no cell service. This is my last hope. Please let this post. And if you know how I can get out of this, please help me. I myself have never had a paranormal experience or anything kind of like that, seen a spirit. I'm a very see it to believe it kind of person, but I am very open-minded. I'm open to the fact that there is stuff out there that cannot be explained. It's just there's too many networks and vast legs of the universe. So while I am a see it to believe it kind of person, I have no doubt that people have paranormal experiences and dark things that can cling to them. While this might read like a fanfic, I do not doubt that this could possibly be something that has happened to the user, or they're experiencing something. Maybe they put their little own twist on it, or maybe not. There also is the aspect of mental health that I think is prevalent as well. Again, I'm not saying that this has to, do with this. This could be just fan fiction, of course. However, mental health issues will also cause things, to feel like they're there. Spirits, perhaps. People have schizophrenia. There's all sorts of things that can come into play. That's a whole different discussion for another day. Just going on the premise of the Nosleep Reddit, I do like reading these because it gets the creative juices flowing. A lot of these people that do end up writing in these little fan fictions. They're very creative. And again, some of these could be real. You know, these people might be experiencing some of the things that they're saying on here. So that's kind of why I find these to be so fascinating. Internet horror is something, you know, entirely on its own. Internet horror, I mean, you can go on and on. There's so many rabbit holes you can go down for days. But if there's any stories you'd like me to read, if you want me to check out any certain Reddits, creepypastas, anything like that, please let me know down in the comments below. I'd love to hear feedback. You know, I started this YouTube channel with the idea that I have a passion for horror. I love reading about horror. I love watching it. Anything that has to do with things that can give you the spooks, the creeps, I'm all about it. That's what I'm all about. So thank you as always. Take care of yourself, and we'll see you in the next video. Peace.